perhaps the laziest form of YouTube video to record is the response to questions and comments from viewers. It's the least effort. I don't even have to write a script. Not that I ever write a script. What, it's been 4 years since I wrote a script on this channel? A couple of the videos about Buddhist philosophy were scripted. And I can tell. I think watching it, I think you can tell too. I'm going to go through this long message from Eric G that I just got as a YouTube comment. I think it's hilarious, though, just to jump into the middle of this. At one point, what he says to me here is, how dare you offer him unasked for advice? That it's implicitly insulting that I am giving Richard advice he didn't ask for. What percentage of Richard's videos consist of Richard giving other people advice he didn't ask for? And what percentage of those videos include insults about their sexuality, insults about their physique, their appearance, threats, challenges to a boxing match or MMA match, threats of a fist fight, threats of violence, having guns and knives on camera? It wasn't just Repzion. There were a whole bunch of other people. That guy Bering, grade A under A. I can't count. Believe me, and I haven't even watched every video. What? Gee, unrequested advice. When he was trying to make it seem like none of this was his fault, Vegan Gains described his channel as like a science education channel. I think a better description of what Vegan Gains does on camera would be unrequested advice. Insulting, denigrating, unrequested advice. That's a pretty good summary of Vegan Gains' channel. And he gives unrequested advice to everyone, including me. So it's not really that unreasonable that I would give advice such as, hey, have you thought about reading a book? Have you thought about if you want to make a career out of, health and nutrition education, formally studying and getting credentials in health nutrition? Does anyone else remember when science-minded Vegan Gains tried to cure his self-diagnosed psychopathy by taking hallucinogenic drugs? Anyone? Anyway, he's a real man of science. What medical science textbook do you think that he got that out of? Does anyone else remember when he got his hands on the coroner's report from the death of a certain bodybuilder? It was Rich Piana. And he tried to interpret the medical opinion in the coroner's report. He got it complete. He has no training. He has no education of that kind. What he has is reckless faith in his own brilliance. And yes, it's the role of critics like me to point out that some of that faith may just be a little bit misplaced. Now, before I read this comment from Eric G, read and reply to, let me just say, some people think I'm obsessed with Vegan Gains. Some people think that this is personal for me. Let's say I get a phone call from the police in Toronto that say my mom has been murdered, and do I know any suspects? If I get that call tomorrow, now, I'd tell the police a whole lot of things about my mom. I'd cooperate with the police. But you know what? I'd say, honestly, Vegan Gains. Probably the most likely suspect. My mom lives in Toronto. Vegan Gains lives in Toronto. The only reason I think Vegan Gains would not murder me in Taiwan is that he's lazy, he's unfamiliar with international travel, he doesn't take international flights at the drop of a hat, he just doesn't have that much experience, and it is a real pain in the neck, that kind of long distance travel. And there was a third reason. Slips my mind. Maybe it was he's busy taking care of his dogs and his rabbits. That was the third reason. I think he's very reluctant to make long trips because he is very committed to raising his pets, including buying meat and serving dead animals to his pets. But sure, I totally think Vegan Gains would kill my mom. And I think he'd kill her over this. Why do I think that? Well, this is part of it. If you say to me, is this personal? How personal is this for you, Eisel? There's no point in this channel's history where I was not criticizing Vegan Gains. There's no point in this channel's history where I wasn't somewhat harshly upbraiding and reproaching Vegan Gains and offering some kind of unasked for advice for how we should improve. This is true. But nevertheless, I'll give you one example. At one point, he said to me, he was just so furious at this other YouTuber over a trivial dispute. It's not even the case that this other YouTuber criticized Richard. Richard flew off the handle, and he was really writing to me that he wanted to beat this guy up and punch him in the face. And I forget if he specifically said he wanted to see his blood or his bloody face, but it was that kind of, violent rant. It was over nothing. I mean, honestly, there was no justification for this, frankly, murderous rage from Richard. Nothing like the Repsian situation. There's a way lower level of provocation. And at that time, again, I tried to kind of be nice and encouraging to Richard, and I offered him criticism and guidance. Like, a great example is the feeding dead animals to your dog thing. Like, I was harsh, but, I didn't just tell him to go fuck himself. I didn't just insult him or something. I really said, look, you're still killing animals, whether you buy meat to feed it to your dog or to feed it yourself. Like, let's really deal with this. So, I haven't violated my own ethical code. But I can remember writing back and just joking and saying, well, look, Richard, I'm going to be in Toronto soon. If you want to, we can do an MMA match, and I'll wear a mask. Like, I just imagine printing out of a color printer, like a photograph of the other YouTuber, and I'll wear the boxing gloves. You can probably be like a joke video. Now, that was a nice thing to say. It's also whatever. It's a legit offer if you want to do a wacky video or something like that when I was in Toronto. But sure, now I look back at those kinds of things and I regret it. I regret it because at that time I assumed, at an earlier stage, I believed Richard's excuse that most of this stuff was just satire. And now I do not believe that excuse, as I have explained repeatedly. And most of these videos we're talking about, yeah, there's no doubt, some of his videos are satire. These clips we've all been playing, we've all been seeing, the reason for his channel being deleted, the threats of violence, all these reactions, him sitting down and talking to you about the extent to which he suffers from hallucination, etc. Real signs of dementia, real signs of insanity by the strictest legal definition. And insane rage, paranoia, what he calls anxiety, but he specifically said someone walking up to him and talking to him in public and him reacting to that face to face in real life with the feeling that this person was trying to kill him and wanting to defend himself, wanting to hurt the person. That he said just when he meets people in public, when he has trivial interactions, he's fighting to restrain a violent defensive urge based on a paranoid delusion. He's talked about all that stuff. And I've said many, many times, I appreciate for other people who have those struggles in the audience, I appreciate that he's doing something brave and generous and courageous in talking about that. If my mother gets murdered in downtown Toronto tomorrow and the police ask me, do you know anyone who is likely to have actually killed your mom? Richard, you're on the top of the list. There are other suspects. I could throw in a couple jokes here that nobody else would get. But there are other suspects. But yeah, Richard, that's what I'd say. So, is this personal? Do I care? Yeah, I feel tainted by that kind of thing. Where I look back at that and think, wow, as much as I stood up to Richard publicly, and as much as I privately tried to kind of influence him to go in a positive direction, I regret that I didn't just stand up way more harshly to him. And you guys know, if you've been following, there were so many other issues, like the racism issue, the Corey McCarthy. I never let up on that. In private messages, I never stopped writing to him saying, look, Richard, these people you are in bed with are like literally white supremacists. They are just as bad as neo-Nazis. Technically, they are not neo-Nazis, not worth explaining why, but they are white supremacists. They openly say they want to kick all the black people out of Canada and the United States. Like, this is their agenda. Like, just read I remember screenshotting the front page of their website. I was like, did you actually read the front page, the about page of this website? Like, do you know what you're supporting, Richard? All those issues I was pushing him on. Naturally, you can only push someone so far. They're only going to listen to so much harsh criticism. But sure, looking back, I wish I was harsher. I wish I was realer. I wish I had said even more than I did. No, Richard, this is totally unacceptable. And the denouement to all this is, like the final or penultimate conflict between me and him is, He made up a series of videos that were an absolute tissue of lies full of rape allegations. Oh, so you think it's harmless having someone on YouTube who's overtly insane and has paranoid delusions and hallucinations? You think there's just no harm, that he can be a great entertainer? Maybe if Richard did stand-up comedy. You know, there have been a lot of stand-up comics who were like more or less medically insane, but who managed to keep it together. Sure, you can be a creative person with serious mental impairments. There are lots of examples of that in history. But you know what? It really is. The hard limit to this is illustrated by that series of videos Richard made. And they didn't just repeat lies from Norwegian. In important ways, they actually discarded the narrative Norwegian tried to create. And it created its own narrative, completely based on lies, step by step by step. What he was presenting is wrong. And how does he respond to me saying to him, look, there are things I know directly here, and there are also things you could know if you just watched carefully what was in Norwegian's video and you noted down the inconsistencies. And you just thought, okay, when did this happen? If you just could think rationally and clearly about why someone is trying to manipulate you into thinking Durian Ryder has this condition, NPD, narcissism, with such compelling evidence as short snippets of YouTube videos made by some guy who broke up with his ex-girlfriend and who claims his ex-girlfriend was a narcissist. Like, this is the like medical forensic psychological evidence. Completely laughable diagnosis of him with having NPD, and then trying to construe that because he defended himself against rape allegations, he must be... It's shameful. It's base, and it's low, and it's wrong. And Richard, you didn't just jump on that bandwagon. You took it further with your own lies. You say you apologized. You didn't apologize to anyone. You didn't apologize to me. And think about what you're accusing me of. You're accusing me of covering up a rape. You're accusing me of being complicit in a crime committed by Durian Ryder, in a fake narrative you put on the internet. Yeah, I care. Yeah, it's personal. This is real as it gets. And there are real disadvantages to having a social and political movement like veganism led by a maniac like Vegan Gains. There were disadvantages to having Gary Yourofsky before. Wake up! It matters. It matters that Vegan Gains is stupid. It matters that he's a maniac. It matters that he makes death threats and fistfight threats and MMA threats against all these people. It's not just him that's out of control. It's the whole vegan movement that's out of control, because that's who we've been led by for the last 5 years. Idiots like Vegan Gains and Gary Yourofsky. And we can do better. Eric G. wrote in, quote, I support Richard on this. He was within his legal rights. That's why he got the weapons back. Are you against people legally owning and collecting firearms and toy weapons? ? Maybe you should move to communist China. Irony of ironies, I have lived in communist China for long periods of time. Maybe check out some other videos on the channel. I lived in communist China most recently, right on the border with Myanmar, northern Myanmar, where there's an ongoing civil war. While we were there, and it was completely peaceful. There were no guns in the streets, there were no drugs in the streets, even though there were literally warlords with machine guns dealing heroin, dealing opium to fund their civil war, like 1 mile away across the border in that part of Myanmar. Yes, communist China has a remarkably high quality of law and order. They have remarkably effective drug control and gun control. Yes, and unfortunately, they do not have democracy or freedom of speech. But sure, there are elements of communist China I am very much impressed by. And even the harshest critic, yeah, you're right. I really was happier living in communist China than living in Toronto, Canada. And I'd rather move back to communist China than Toronto. No doubt. Quote, just because he has mental problems doesn't mean he shouldn't own weapons. Do you think blind people should get driver's licenses? How about people who openly state on film they have paranoid delusions, violent fantasies, they have instinctual violent reactions, that they want to stab and kill people? Just the hallucinations alone. Do you think that someone who has the symptoms, the checklist of symptoms that Vegan Gains has, should be able to own and carry a gun? Do you think they should be able to own and carry a knife, as they walk around with the paranoid delusions he has, that he says when people try to talk to him or hug him or shake his hand, he thinks they're going to kill him and he reacts. And he hallucinates. He has serious problems with hallucinations and anxiety attacks and responding to anxiety with violence. That sounds like a good idea to you. You tell me one country in the world where you can get a gun license if you have these symptoms. Every country in the world I know, there are going to be exceptions. I mean, if you go through sub-Saharan Africa, if you go through countries where there are barely any laws, there are going to be exceptions. But you know what? Pretty much every country in Europe, North America, you have to go through some kind of a test to prove that you are not insane, that you are not hallucinating. And if you do have a record indicating that you are hallucinating, or have this kind of insanity, then buying a firearm is going to be kind of difficult for you. Okay. Quote, he is not a violent offender, and as such is legally allowed to own weapons in Canada. You're not from Canada. He says, quote, he's not a violent... Do you have any idea how restrictive the weapons laws are in Canada? That's hilarious. In Canada, you don't have the right to own a goddamn thing, okay? We have no right to own weapons in Canada, and Richard knows that, and he's even commented on it in videos, okay? Good luck. So, quote, he can do what he wants with his money. You talk about him skirting around the law by carrying a knife in Canada. If you don't have intent to do harm with it, then it's not illegal, as he explained. Really? You're not from Canada, bro. In Canada, if you're literally carrying a knife inside the plastic, this is Ontario. I grew up in Ontario. I grew up in Toronto. Inside the plastic and cardboard wrapping with the price tag on it, and you have the receipt, and it's in a shopping bag, and you're on your way from the grocery store to your home, it's still illegal. That's the law in Ontario. You can still be arrested for carrying a knife. And guess why? Because you can be going to an altercation. You can intentionally keep the receipt in the shopping bag and tell the police officer, oh, but officer, okay, no, you're dead wrong. In Ontario, you can be arrested for carrying a flashlight as a weapon. I know. Sorry, you're just making things up. And no, he is trying to, in that clip, he is trying to violate the law, whatever you want to say. And, good luck. If you want to establish that you don't have intent to do harm when you're carrying a knife after you get that charge, tell it to the judge. That's what we all have to do. I mean, maybe, look, I'm a critic of Canadian law and order, but that's what you have to do in Canada. If you're arrested for carrying a knife, under whatever circumstances, you would have to tell it to the judge that you had a legitimate reason to be carrying that knife. And just look at the knife he's showing you in that video. It's a butterfly knife. You think any judge would agree, like, oh yeah, that's to cut up an orange or an apple? Clearly, no. I don't know any judge that naive. I really doubt it. Maybe you'd luck out, Richard. Maybe you'd get community service. Be lucky. Being lucky is a lot better than being violent. It's a lot better than being dishonest. Not everyone gets to be lucky. If you have a problem with this, then it's not a problem with Richard, it's a problem with Canadian law. He didn't do anything wrong here. These are just your political opinions. This I love. You criticize him for wasting time playing video games, but you admittedly let your daughter play video games. So it's okay for children to waste their time and not adults? That seems like a hypocritical position. My daughter is 5 years old. What do you think my daughter is going to do while riding on the train from Dijon to the Côte d'Azur? My daughter really cannot sit down and crack open the textbooks and start reading Aristotle and Cicero with me. Okay? Yeah, you're right. I don't encourage my daughter to play video games all the time or something. But you know what? There's a difference between being 5 and being 25. Yeah, there is. As I say, there's a time to take on more adult, responsibilities. So the quote continues, how about soccer games or chess games? Are these a waste of time as well? Are people who play chess acting childish and need to grow up? Wow, you really have me on the ropes there, buddy. What about complex video games that require problem solving, communication, or math problems? Dude, like, just pause. You must realize you're making excuses here. It's just, why? Why make excuses? Why not just stop? Like, there's an alternative to making excuses. Anytime you're deep into making excuses like this, just think about what it is that's motivating this behavior. What it is you're making excuses for. There's an alternative to living a lie, right? It's just ridiculous to me. Okay, are these a total childish waste of time? I'm continuing the quote. Do you never do anything unproductive during the day to unwind and release stress? Why nitpick him so much? Playing video games can open up his channel to a younger audience, which is probably part of the reason why he has way more subs than you. Video games and dark humor are appealing to young people. What's immature and childish to you is funny and entertaining to someone else. You guys have different approaches. Both are good. So the final paragraph of this quotation. Your approach of nitpicking him and constantly talking down about him is incredibly condescending. How many years did I try to positively engage the guy? Years. I gave it years. I took a positive approach with a lot of these people, including, you guys know, people like Little Cheetah. I took a positive, conciliatory, constructive approach with a lot of people I don't really have common ground with for the future of the movement. I doubt you did, Eric. I doubt you've made any of the positive efforts I did. So it wasn't all criticism. It really wasn't. As mentioned, and I regret it. I wish I'd basically been harsher with the guy, because I feel, as I say, I now feel ethically tainted by the looks of this. Okay, quote. Giving him life advice that he never asked for, such as you have to put away childish things and develop self-discipline. Yeah. Vegan Gains, the internet's #1 channel on giving people life advice that is unasked for.